Good afternoon. It is now 3 p.m. I'd like to call the Richland County Transportation Improvement Work Session order. Madam Clerk, this is a work session, so I don't think we necessarily need to do the roll, or do we need to do the roll?
You can. You don't have to, since it's a work session.
All right,
you
well,
can.
just for the sake of the record, go ahead and call the roll. We'll see who's joining us online.
Brenham,
Present.
Pugh,
Here.
McBride, Livingston,
Here.
Teratio, Weaver, Barron,
Here.
Walker,
Just made it here.
Mackey,
Here.
English, Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. The only item today on our agenda is a presentation of transportation needs and the new transportation sales tax funding. We have, I guess, are we starting off with you? All right. You're recognized. Ray Jones.
Madam Chair, other members of council, and folks that have joined us online. Ray Jones with Parker Poe, and there'll be other folks speaking today as well, so you won't be stuck listening to me for 2 hours. If hopefully everyone has in front of you, or you'll be able to see it online, a copy of the presentation. We'll make sure an electronic copy is made available and provided to you as well. But we wanted to give you the hard copy so you could flip through some things. If we go ahead and flip to that second page, Ms. Annette, thank you. So this really represents where we're headed today. We're going to talk about sort of 8 general areas. We'll spend a whole lot of time on transportation needs. I anticipate that'll be where we spend most of our time. But we are going to take a quick look back, Madam Chair and members of council, to the 2023 resolution of County Council that sort of began our journey. We'll then have David Beatty with Stantec and others, to the extent he asks others to join him, to talk about the work that he and his group have done on transportation needs identification here in the county. We'll then spend some time talking about funding options. We'll talk about the potential funding options that we see to include a penny. We'll talk about ways that the council will be able to sort through the projects or sort through the needs so that they can then become potential projects. We'll talk about the concept of a potential ballot question and what categories on that ballot question looks like. Not only will I talk about input and advice from other bodies, I think Mr. Beatty will as well, folks that have already been engaged with respect to the needs of the county. And then we'll talk further about a strategy to involve the existing Transportation Penny Advisory Committee as well as the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee. Finally, we'll discuss a little bit of our current roadmap, which County Council adopted at its meeting on March 5th. So if you could just flip the slide. I just wanted to take a minute because it's, October 23rd may as well be 5 years ago at this point, October of 2023, that is. At the time, council had gone through a long series of deliberations about how it might approach the upcoming 2024 general election. And I wanted to just provide for council sort of where we landed, or where you landed, in terms of the adoption of a resolution. And at that time, council, having looked at both a capital project sales tax penny option and a transportation penny option, adopted this resolution, which authorized county staff to prepare for a transportation sales tax referendum expected to be held at the 2024 general election pursuant to the cited statute. And I thought it was poignant or telling, the whereas clause that sort of set the stage and I think frames today's discussion. And again, this is from council's October 3rd, 2023 resolution. It says, County Council desires for and directs county staff to undertake all necessary preparations as required under the Act and the general election law of the state of South Carolina to hold a referendum, and directs that the Ad Hoc Transportation Committee of Council, obviously it's already been formed, but be formed to develop a proposed transportation-related projects to be funded with the transportation tax. And so since October of 2023, there has been a great deal of activity that has been occurring in the background, if you will, a lot of which we'll talk about today. We'll get feedback, we'll answer questions, and hopefully then have a good path as we move forward. So before I stop and ask Mr. Beatty to get up and talk about the transportation needs, which will be on the next slide, any questions about where we're going, Madam Chair, or other attendees of the work session?
I cannot see anybody online, so if you have any questions before we move forward.
If we go to the next slide, and maybe we'll turn it over to Mr. Beatty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Good afternoon, Council. David Beatty with Stantec. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I will be relatively brief in my comments, but I'll certainly welcome any thoughts or questions or interjections that you may have. So Stantec was engaged really just about 2.5 months ago to assist the county with a transportation needs assessment. And our scope of work really included 4 items: gather existing and planned projects, engage the community through stakeholder input, prepare a cost estimate of those existing and planned and publicly provided projects, and then summarize that process, and then develop a capital plan showing potential expenditures over a specific time frame. So that was our scope of work. To date, we have gathered that publicly available project list. I do have a couple of handouts if I can disseminate. And I've got one for each council member. Thank you. So to date, we've had 11 public meetings and spread throughout the county. These public meetings were conducted between January 16 and February 22nd of this year, and we presented countywide and district-specific maps, which is being handed out to you as we speak. To gather existing and planned projects, we reached out to the local municipalities within the county. We spoke with county staff, it's yourselves, and we met with a number of these entities. We emailed each municipality numerous times to get their input, and we did receive projects specifically from the county, the town of Blythewood, the town of Irmo, City of Columbia, and the City of Forest Acres. And there were a couple of unfinished 2012 penny projects that we've included in the needs assessment. And that was a portion of Pineview Road from Shop to Bluff, and a portion of Broad River Road from the Dutch Fork split over to the new revised interchange on I-26, exit 97. So those were the groups that we engaged and the process that we gathered the information. And additionally, we've created the project list. We got this? Okay, I'm sorry. So the next task was, how did we develop the list of project needs? So most of the projects were previously identified with the Central Midlands Council of Governments, and we used their 2045 long-range transportation plan. And this plan included widenings, intersections, bikeways, and these projects were already identified and prioritized by the Central Midlands Council of Governments. We included programmatic categories of resurfacing, dirt road paving, and sidewalk improvements with no specific areas identified for any of those three areas. We included the municipal projects. And then lastly, the project list includes those projects that were identified by the public. As part of gathering those projects, and at the 11 public meetings that we conducted, 224 citizens signed in to the meetings. Now, likely we had another 100 that would attend the meetings and did not sign in, but we do have 224 official attendees. We received 35 specific projects from the public, and we've included that in the list that you've been presented. We also received a number of non-specific comments that we did not include in this list. And when I say non-specific, we received requests such as fix all the potholes in Richland County. We need more golf cart paths to get from Irmo to Columbia. Fix all the signals in the county. So we received those comments and we have recorded them, but we did not include them as they're not project-specific comments from the public. Dirt roads, sidewalks were also comments that we did receive. Probably the biggest comment was resurfacing, and it was truly fix the potholes throughout the county. A lot of widening comments, intersections, and then dirt road comments. That was the categories that are predominant. Some of the project highlights, there were more widening comments in half the county. There were more dirt road paving comments in districts 10 and 11 than there were in other parts of the county. So that's kind of what we heard. And we can come to the project list at any time you'd like to discuss. But where is Stantec going forward and what work has to be done? We are in the process of summarizing the public comments. We've got a stack of every single public comment that we've received. We have scanned and recorded, and that will be provided to the county as an appendix to our report. We've summarized those comments and reduced the number of pages to about 8. So we've got all the comments, the summary. We're going to summarize the public involvement process, where, when, and how. The public meeting displays. The cost estimating process is underway. We've got a process developed, and I'll go through that in just a moment. And then our fourth bullet is to develop a capital plan. And before we can finish that capital plan, we'll need council's guidance on the ultimate project list, the total anticipated funding on an annual basis that we could use to assume, and the number of years. So we do need some input. This is still an iterative process before we can formalize a capital plan. But that's where Stantec is. The last thing really that I want to really comment is the cost. How did we come up with the costs that's shown on this piece of paper? So again, this piece of paper includes the projects that have been provided to us by the public entities and the public. Stantec has not added projects. We have not deleted projects. This is existing available information that we've received to date. So we put a cost estimate to these projects. And we began with, if it's a widening, a per mile cost. If it was an intersection type, whether it's a roundabout or a T intersection, we came up with a base cost for those types of projects, a per foot of sidewalk. Then what we did is we went a little bit further and we looked at each project and we said, well, if it has a significant drainage, railroad, bridges, we increased the cost accordingly to come up with a base cost. And as we're early in the cost estimating process, we took the base cost and we increased it by 15% as a contingency because we're not in final analysis. So that's how we developed a base construction cost for each project. Now then, there's always more to developing a project than just the construction bid number. There's design, there's right-of-way, there's utility relocations, and then there's construction management. And when you combine those 4 areas, they typically make up about 60% of the base construction cost estimate. So if a project base construction is $100 million, it's going to take about another $60 million to design it, move the utilities, buy the right-of-way, and manage construction. So at the bottom of the list, by increasing for all of the soft costs associated with managing and developing a construction project, these projects total right at $2.2 billion. I do want to note, we assumed $250 million for dirt road paving, sidewalks, and resurfacing. Okay, and so those were not increased by the 60% because they're a different category. There's no right-of-way and there's no utilities with resurfacing. But the grand total is $2.2 billion, and it's very important to note that this is in 2024 dollars. So it's not realistic, but just for example, if the county had $2.2 billion at one time today, and if it could all go to construction. So that's what the $2.2 billion represents, the total cost in 2024. I think it is important to note that this $2.2 billion and our charge was not to address any needs for the Comet bus system. So this $2.2 billion is only for transportation, and it's based on this list that we've gathered to date. That's a summary of what I had to present. I'll be glad to take questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for your summary. I appreciate it. If you could, I just want to go over the pricing again really quick because I was looking at the notes at the bottom, and I see in the notes it says City of Columbia costs provided by City of Columbia. And so that is totaling into your total estimate, but you're not saying that you yourself know for a fact that these estimates are correct or not correct based on the other categories in this.
Yes, that is correct. So Stantec and our subconsultant did come up with a cost estimate for all of the projects. However, since the City of Columbia has a deep bench of their own transportation engineering professionals, they provided their own projects and they provided cost estimates with them. So we simply carried them forward in this number.
Mr. Ratio, you recognized?
Thank you. So looking through, I'm excited about a lot of these projects. One that I know that lots of people in the City of Columbia and District 5 will be excited about is the assembly rail separation. I think that might be the highest base cost of all of these. And I don't know exactly how to ask this question particularly, but, with an effort of that scale, I'm just thinking of ways that other entities may want to participate in that kind of expenditure. So is there a way that we can do that, or do we have to kind of assume the entire cost and then try to encourage our State House members to participate? Can you give us a little, is that a good question?
Yes, ma'am. I think it is a very good question.
Okay.
And in my experience, there are other avenues to participate in revenue and cost sharing, especially in a project of this magnitude. There are other entities that could provide resources. The City of Columbia, the railroads themselves can provide input and can at times provide funding. And then there are both federal and state grants that can be applied for. And occasionally on projects of this magnitude, there are both federal and state earmarks that can be used.
Thank you. Just flagging that for everyone, because looking down the list, you know, that one has a large number by it, but I know that it is a priority for a lot of people that I talk to.
Ms. Newton?
Thank you. So first, a quick tactical question and then a few other questions. So one is that after the public input meetings that were held, one of the things that we did is, you know, there is an input form that was distributed. What was the deadline for people to provide feedback?
This previous Friday.
Okay, so last Friday. All right. Understanding, well, I'm going to say this is my understanding that we're always wanting to have input from the public. So wanted to do that. So this list is helpful and also not representative of the things that I hear when I'm in my district and citizens are asking about things. And so some of it may just be the process by which this was compiled, because specifically you had the people that you met with. It was based on, you know, the 17 people who came to my meeting, which doesn't equal, you know, all of the people that I touch in the community. And so this wouldn't necessarily be a question for you, but a question that I would put out there is, you know, or a note is that we need to continue to, you know, refine and put things on here. And so, you know, without delving into that, I know one of the biggest things that I hear, well, you talked about them in general, right? So resurfacing are issues. In my district is probably every other district in Richland County. Some of the most used roads that we have are actually SCDOT roads, but that aside, those are the roads that people are using. And so when you look at my district, you know, Garner's Ferry Road, Trotter Road, you know, Kaufman Road, I could go on. All of those roads are roads that need to have some love to them. Additionally, sidewalks are hugely important, which aren't necessarily, you know, represented here. Just a lot of safety concerns, particularly in areas where there are heavily trafficked roads and schools. A road where I hear all the time, for example, is Lower Richland Boulevard, particularly as you look at some of the developments around there. So I guess I just put it out there. But my two questions in terms of how they're incorporated on this list, and they may not be for you. One is the previous projects. So you mentioned that, but you mentioned like Pineview and Bluff, which is a really big project. But that doesn't take into account Miss Smith, who may live on XYZ dirt road, whose road has been on the list to be paved forever, and they're waiting to come up. So I would want to understand how this reflects those projects that you didn't mention. And then my last question for council consideration is, when we're looking at those projects that weren't done, one thing that I might want to take a look at is there were a few projects that we had to rescope because the penny would not have worked without rescoping them, where, you know, we did that a few years ago. You know, can we go back and look and say, okay, this is what the traffic conditions were at that time when we had to make this choice because we didn't have the funding. Can we go back and look at those and make sure, hey, what's the level of service on the road? What type of changes or development have happened since then? Do we need to rescope a previously descoped project? So, sorry, that was a lot.
I can probably only help with a little bit of that answer. So our task was really under the assumption that the existing 2012 penny was being managed in-house, and Director Maloney would be the most appropriate, from my standpoint, to be able to speak to which dirt roads and which resurfacing is still to be done under the existing penny. And then...
Can I stay on that? I guess my question is, when you talk about unfinished projects for the penny, to me, an unfinished dirt road is an unfinished project from the penny. And so I understand that Mr. Maloney would address, these are the ones that are still on the list. My question to you would be, for the ones that aren't on his list because they're going to be done, are you re-adding them to the pending projects list?
We are not adding any specific dirt road projects to this project needs assessment. We're recommending a programmatic dollar amount. At this time, it is $100 million. And we would recommend that the county follow the same process for their dirt road paving and prioritization moving forward with projects. So as far as this needs assessment, we're not drilling down into that level of the details with the dirt roads.
Thank you. Then the other parts of my question, which were specifically as it relates to if rescope projects were also evaluated as part of this.
It's my understanding that the existing penny is addressing those, so we did not include those in this needs assessment.
Thank you.
Director Maloney, was there anything you wanted to add to any of that?
At this time, we're going through the entire dirt road program as far as the funded list. And the funded list will have some drops as we go through it because we had a change in policy for 51% actually being able to drop a project or cancel a project on dirt roads. Beyond that, we have a prioritization that continues into the unfunded area. And so that programmatic amount would be to add funding in to continue down the list into the unfunded area in the future. So it continues to do those.
And based on the information that you have, and it's hard to know when the right time is to bring these things up. Looking at that $100 million number, are you in a position now, or will you be in a position later to comment on how that figure would address the unfunded roads that are on the list?
Yes, ma'am. Depending on how that separates into resurfacing and dirt roads, we would, if we say had $50 million, and we currently in the penny have $45 million for since 2012. So we would look at how many dirt roads, with inflation as we go, will that fund continuing down the remaining list of projects. At that rate, it won't fund all dirt roads, but it would have a point that would extend, say, another third of the way down the remaining roads in the county.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Barron, followed by Branham, and then Pugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that I don't necessarily have any questions, but I do want to just lift a couple of things up for the record. And that is that my first statement would be that I would like for staff to provide us with an updated list of the completed projects. This is a request that I did make and a couple of my constituents had made during our meeting. It was stated that it would be updated and placed on the website. It's not there yet. And I think as we are having these discussions, it's very important that we know what's already been completed and versus what was funded or proposed to be funded. So I would like that. And secondly, I am somewhat at a disadvantage because I am virtual. But as I am virtual, I just want to, I wasn't able to get the document that was passed out. So with that, I just would like to make sure that as we look at our projects moving forward and the projects that we have moving forward that are being proposed or with the needs assessment, somehow should we move forward with a penny, that the funds are distributed in a manner that is equitable. Ms. Teresa mentioned a very large project, and it's a needed project that will take place downtown. But such a large project does leave us with fewer dollars to distribute throughout 10 other districts. And so if we are going to look to fund things like this, I definitely welcome the conversation by getting other stakeholders involved to help us fund these projects. And that staff is very creative in their approach to making sure that there aren't projects that are left out in some of the more rural communities or the less traveled areas. And that's all I have to say. I'm sure once I get the document, the engagement document, and review it, I'll have some further questions. But I did want to just mention those items for my colleagues to just kind of, as we move forward in having conversation, that we take all these things into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. If I could have a member of staff, I guess, address the issue related to updates at all. Is there a timeline related to Ms. Barron's first question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. So we do have a list of projects per district that you will find on the Richland Penny website. If you are to go onto richlandpenny.com and you click under the About Us drop-down menu and then under completed projects, you can link to projects by district. It also has a list of dirt road projects, but you can look at completed projects, those that are upcoming, and those that are under construction. And again, the last update that we had was from January of 2024, but the communications team is working with Director Maloney and his staff to have those completed and updated on a more ongoing basis.
Madam Chair, if I may.
You're recognized, Ms. Barron.
Thank you, and thank you, Director O'Kane, for bringing that to our attention. And I think you being detailed for those residents that are listening to how to find that is great. I just, I think it's critically important, if this is an ongoing conversation that we are having as council, that we have to have those documents need to be almost real time, if at all possible, because we're fielding conversation and questions. I know last night I went to 3 community meetings, and that's the number one conversation. But if we have a document that's the most recent is January, it does put us somewhat at a disadvantage. And I don't know the best way to get these done as quickly as possible. But it is an ongoing concern, and it is an ongoing request that we will have. And so I just want to, again, I know there's many things to do, but this is a hot topic, and as it's a hot topic, it lies in the priority list as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. Thank you, Director O'Kane. Councilmember Branham, you recognize.
Thank you. So the first section of projects is this list compiled from the Central Midlands Council of Governments 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan. Can anybody speak to the logic or the approach of the COG's preparation of this plan and this list?
I can provide a little bit of background, yes, sir. The plan was updated. It was published in December of 21. So in 2020 and 2021, the COG had a series of public meetings, and this was during COVID, so much of that was virtual. The COG had listening sessions to the public. They met with municipalities, governmental entities to get input on what is important, types of projects, categories of improvements that are important. And then that listening session helped the COG update the previous plan. So they update a 25-year plan every 5 years. So there's always an existing plan that they're updating based on projects that have been completed, projects that have been added and identified as having priority.
Just to follow up on that, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I heard you say that they took public input. Were there ever any traffic engineers or transportation professionals who studied, researched, used analysis to add or create the list as well?
Yes, and that list of engineers would include technical staff from the governmental entities and municipalities. It would include engineers and planners from the DOT, and then it would include non-engineers, but other staff and publicly elected officials would have had and have input on that list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pugh, you recognize?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comment was more so directed for Director Maloney. My question, sir, is what formula are we using for dirt roads? Because a lot of comments and input that I get from community members in unincorporated Richland County is that the projects they're changed every year. So, for example, one of them constituents said they were at the top of the list to have their roads paved, and then once the list came back out again, they dropped down. And so I just want to know for us on the record, what formula are we using to determine which roads are being paved and which roads are being funded?
The funded list is based on priority, so from 1 to however far it goes down in each council district. That has not changed. I haven't changed it. I've been with the penny for 2.5 years. And before that time, it's the same list. And I've heard that. We did receive that comment in our public outreach that there were some people indicating that at one time they were funded, and then when they looked at this list, they're not funded. And I do not know how that would have happened. I know that when it was developed early on, there was a group called the Dirt Road Ad Hoc Committee that helped guide and develop how the list is. And it may be at that time, but that would have been in the 2012 to 2014 time period, that there would have been iterations perhaps of the dirt road list. But since that time, there has been no change in the break between funded and unfunded. And we certainly don't change it, and we work down through that to the bottom of the funded list, looking for new consent denials, new ability to do the projects, and it doesn't change. So there were people that are, say, second down or fourth down on unfunded and wanted to know if because the penny's still operating and collecting funds, would that change? And the answer is no. It was programmatically capped at $45 million from the beginning, and so we're working within those confines. And even if we've only collected $35 million at this point in the penny, that list won't change.
Yes, sir, you recognize?
So what I'm asking is, what criteria are we using to prioritize these roads?
The group that worked with council back in that time to prioritize them used residents per unit distance, and then they gave 2 points for churches and businesses as compared to a residence as 1 point. So they looked at all those along a corridor, and if you had 10 of those in a mile versus 30 in a mile, the 30 in a mile would be a higher priority, and they just had to look at scoring how much it would cost per unit mile based on the number of residents on that road. And so they put in a unit price originally of $800,000 a mile. Well, that's about $1.3 to $1.5 million a mile at this time. So that doesn't change the priority, it changes the cost. But they looked at if it was less to cost per mile based on the number of residents. So how much money is going in per resident made it a higher priority if it was a lower number. So kind of like what is the positive impact for the number of people you're spending the dollar on got a higher priority than if you were only spending that same amount of money on fewer people.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, you recognize?
Yeah, this is probably more of a Mr. Beatty question. There's obviously a significant amount of the funding is for road widening. Is there a way you can, not now, but you can let me know which of those road widenings are city or county or state? A concern for that is what happens is, like we did with Broad River Road, you know, we had some $52 million for Broad River Road, and the state was working on that, so the state ended up taking over, so we were able not to spend out $52 million. But some of these widenings may be in the process of getting funded by the state. If that's the case, we don't need to spend that amount of money since it's such a significant amount of funding. So it'd be very helpful to have some idea of the state schedule for some of these widenings, if it's a state road, and most of them I'm sure are. Is a big concern of mine because that's where all the money is, and I think we could save a whole lot of money for other projects if we take a closer look at what's happened with these road widenings. And it's one of the things I like to look at. So at some point, a list of which of those are state or not county.
Well, Mr. Livingston, I can offer now, at this point, I am extremely certain that each of these widenings are state-maintained roads. And I can also tell you that these are in the order of priority ranking from the Central Midlands COG. Now, they take their 25-year long-range plan and they develop a 5-year plan called a Transportation Improvement Plan. We often call it the TIP. And within that 5-year plan, I don't have it in front of me, but some of these projects may already be in that 5-year plan to be programmed to be paid for and constructed by state dollars.
That's what I want to know. That's what I'm getting at, yes.
So the document that we need to provide you is the 5-year TIP prepared by the Central Midlands Council of Government, and it will identify those projects that are planned to be funded and that would allow you the opportunity to use that as information as to whether you chose to include a particular project or continue to allow the DOT to fund that project.
Thank you. I noticed, Ms. Barron, your hand is still up. Is that from before, or did you have another question?
I apologize. It was from before.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beatty, did you have any additional information to go?
Not at this time, no, ma'am.
Just, you said it briefly, but just so I can get it down, what did you say? You mentioned you had a little bit of work to complete. What is your, I guess, time frame and finishing all tasks and wrapping this up?
Our scope of work included the 4 items: compiling the list, which we have done, conducting the public outreach, which we have done, and we have summarized in draft form, and then looking at the cost estimating process, which we have done and we have compiled. So I could deliver those 3 components late next week, if you'd like. But then the 4th leg of my deliverable is taking a modified project list, once that decision has been made to modify the list, and then looking at X number of years, whatever those years are, 10, 12, 15, whatever you may direct, and then developing a plan of, okay, with this much money per year over these years, how could the list be developed? Developing a spending plan, if you will. So that would take me a week to 2 weeks once I was provided that direction on how much money per year and how many years and which projects to use.
Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate it. All right, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. Stay close. If we could go to the next slide in the presentation. So we've already hit on this a little bit, but I do want to highlight what we think is a really important distinction between the needs that have been identified, which they're there. They exist. They're being tracked by a number of different organizations. Those are things that need to be done today in the county. The question is, in order to address those needs, what are our funding options? When you're talking about a price tag that will exceed $2 billion, I think your options are going to start really dwindling quickly. Your typical options to pay for any capital project, of course, would be money from the budget. You can always pay as you go, and the county pays for plenty of capital-related items on a pay-as-you-go basis. Not a program of this size. The county issues bonds for lots of its capital project needs. As you all know, bonds are paid for directly, typically from property taxes. The county's capacity to issue bonds is not without limit. And the price tag for a program like this would far exceed the county's bonding capacity. And even if the county committed its bonding capacity to something like this, of course, it would have no bonding capacity left over for anything else. So that presents, we think, a challenge. Mr. Beatty mentioned grants, which are certainly opportunities. I read in the newspaper today, Mr. Horacio, that the Assembly Street project is on Lindsey Graham's earmark list, $10 million. Doesn't mean we've got it, but it's on the list. So there are ancillary sources of funds, but typically not sufficient to pay for the entire program. And so you're forced to step back and say, okay, well, what do we do with a $2 billion program? How do we pay for it? And when you look around the state, and we've already made this decision once as a community, you're really forced to then look at alternative sources. And the main alternative source that counties look at in this state is a penny. And so as you all know, there's lots of different kinds of pennies that counties can utilize, whether they be capital project sales tax pennies, or in the case of the transportation penny, there's now 4+ counties that have implemented a transportation penny, with several that will be on the ballot for the first time in 2024. So increasingly, counties are looking to a penny for purposes of taking care of a program of this magnitude. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Interestingly enough, and I can assure you that there was no correlation between the number that Mr. Beatty gave you and the number that we have been working on with the county's financial advisors, First Tryon. But we asked First Tryon, with the help of Ms. Thomas and her staff, to take a look at the historical collections of the penny, the current penny, and then project it forward for 15 years. Interestingly enough, they project that a new penny would collect about $2.2 billion over a 15-year period. You may have noticed that that was the exact number that was in Mr. Beatty's project list. Doesn't include inflation, and I would reiterate that the $2.2 billion on Mr. Beatty's list includes only transportation projects. It doesn't include anything for the CMRTA, the Comet bus system. If we can go to the next slide, please. So if we take the step of deciding that the penny is the primary, if not the only option, then the council is going to be presented at some point, and we're going to talk about this, about making some significant decisions. And among the most significant decisions will be, how will the penny, the $2.2 billion that's projected, how will it be split between the transportation projects that appear on this list, some of which are not yet fully designated, and there may be future projects that we don't yet know about. How will the council shift money between those projects, and then how much of the penny will then go to the CMRTA? That's a critical decision that will have to be made as we decide how we move forward. If we go to the next slide, please. So it's interesting, you all have begun to enunciate principles, things that are important. I've heard, I want to make sure that projects that were not done on the last penny get some priority. That's a principle to look at this project list with, or to look at this list of needs and to figure out which projects to do. There may be other principles you look at. For instance, is there other money that's going to be committed to one of these projects? Is there state money that's going to be committed to one of these projects? If so, maybe we want to put our penny somewhere else. So in thinking about how we get from a list of needs to a list of projects, we think it's within this council's power and ambit to decide what critical principles will be applied. What decision-making principles will this council adopt in order to take this list of needs and put it into a list of prioritized projects? And so we think this concept of principles, which we think has always existed but should be formalized, is an evolution of how the council has approached the penny. We think these are guidelines for how and where the proceeds of the penny should be spent, and how they should be used to fund the county's transportation needs. And if you'll go to the next slide, maybe more specifically, in addition to the examples that have already been presented today, unfinished projects, is there additional federal dollars available? Will the state already be addressing one or more of these projects? There's several others, and we think this list is going to grow as the council begins to think about this. The issue of priority of projects, just generally, how, when, who, how we prioritize, how to divide the penny in between various project categories, which we'll talk about in just a minute. There are other factors, maybe you'll call them soft factors, the needs of a community, safety, access, how should they be prioritized? And then one of the things we're seeing now with what I call the modern penny is there are communities that are taking a portion of what they anticipate collecting in their penny, and they're setting it aside for things they don't know about yet, for strategic or critical projects that could occur in the future They're ensuring that dollars are set aside from the penny to address those. All of those would be the types of project principles that we would expect the council ultimately to adopt, again, to take this list of needs and to begin to boil it down to a list of actionable projects. If you can go to the next slide, please. Then the question is, okay, well, how do we get from a list of needs to a list of projects and then to actually what's on the ballot? As we've discussed over these past 6 months, there's likewise been an evolution of what appears on the ballot. The statute's very clear in terms of what needs to appear on the ballot. The statute permits categories of different kinds of projects to appear on the ballot. Categories meaning broader descriptions of things that will be done with the dollars. You do not have to have a specific list of projects or an extensive list of projects, nor does that list of projects have to be specifically prioritized on the ballot question. Are we suggesting that that means that we don't need to spend a lot of time and effort to ensure that the public knows what the penny is going to be spent on? Of course not. We're just talking about what literally appears in the paper, on the paper of the ballot when somebody steps in to vote. So we call those categories. So you're going from a long list of needs to a distilled list of projects that are ultimately categorized so that the voters appreciate what kinds of projects that we're going to work on this time. In one of our prior conversations, we suggested to the council that one way to categorize the projects would be, as we've suggested here, that we'd start first with community improvement projects, which, if you will, would have more of a local community flavor, could include the types of roads in communities like you mentioned, Ms. Newton, could include pedestrian-friendly types of projects as well as sidewalks. It could include the proverbial greenway, which is not particularly well defined in the statute. That's not a word that you'll see, but we'd like to better define for voters what they're voting on. So community improvement projects are closer to home kinds of projects. County advancement projects are projects that have county-wide implications, whether it be the kinds of projects that we talked about that have been suggested on Assembly Street or other types of projects that are on the list that Mr. Beatty has provided. They are things that have broad impact, heavily traveled roads, areas that need work that impact lots of citizens in our county. And of course, finally, comment enhancement projects. Those are the projects that would go to the CMRTA. As you all know and have already discussed as a council, one of the reasons that a county would choose a transportation penny versus the other kinds of pennies that might be available to you under state law is because it's only the transportation penny that can be used for mass transit projects. And as we well know, from the last penny and moving forward, we understand that the CMRTA and the comment bus system remain a heavily used asset in our community and need funding. And so those are the three suggested categories. And if we could go now to the next slide, I'll pause here in just a minute. We've taken those categories and we've literally put them into a ballot question, which would be much easier to see. I hope you can see it, Ms. Barron, much easier to see with the materials in front of you. The ballot question would literally be what is there when folks walk into the ballot box. You'll see that we've utilized a particular format here. It's statutorily called for. You'll see that the question has bracketed how many years the penny would be in effect. You're required to put a certain number of years in effect. A question was raised earlier, are you required to cut it off at a certain amount? The answer is no, although you see communities do that, and we did that as a community. That's one of the reasons that even though we have a 22-year penny, we've collected the penny more quickly than we imagined we would. What you are required to do is state the total cost, the estimated total cost of the projects that are to be paid for with the penny. Here, we've put $2.2 billion because that's what we anticipate the penny will generate over 15 years. That number is also in brackets because it needs work. It needs further analysis, further study. You'll see that each of the Project 1, Project 2, and Project 3, that they line up with the project categories that we suggested to you before. You'll also see that rather than specific dollar numbers that are being assigned to each of the projects, we're suggesting that a percentage of the penny collection be what is your guiding concept for how you're going to spend money in a certain category. We've seen other communities use percentages, and we think it's a much easier concept for folks to appreciate. When you walk in the ballot box, you see exactly what I'm voting on. How much of the penny is going to go to the comment, how much of the penny is going to larger projects, and how much of the penny is going to go to community improvement projects. So that is the suggestion from us as your council on this matter about how our question might look. Doesn't mean it won't be revised. Doesn't mean that we can't get deeper into it. Let me stop there before we get into some other conversation.
Good breaking point. Any questions? Mr. Jones, you mentioned kind of other counties have done it this way. Can you give us an example of one of those?
So right now, and we have the information that we're glad to give council, but we've looked at Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, and Beaufort. Each of those counties have a slightly different approach. It's interesting. I wouldn't say that there's a one-size-fits-all. But when you look at their ballot questions, for the most part, what they are doing is they're giving a very bland description of the projects that are being approved in the referendum. I would argue that they're even less detailed than what we have. Likewise, they're assigning a specific dollar amount to a specific category of projects, although in one case we saw the percentages and we thought that was candidly more clear. And at least in one situation, we saw a description of projects along the lines of what you see here, local projects versus regional projects, which again seemed to speak better to the voter about what they're actually voting on. So the county that is closely tracking us right now is Beaufort. You'll see more of Beaufort's material. We can't completely follow the example of Beaufort because they're on a different timeline than we are and they have different needs than we do. But their question will look similar to this one, and their ordinance, the way they've done their ordinance, will be a suggestion from us that we think about taking a similar approach. And again, conceptually, the idea is that you have broad descriptions of projects, not granular descriptions of projects, so that would then lock you in a way that would make it difficult for the program to be managed, which is something we've talked about before.
Councilman Branham, you recognize?
Under the last penny, I guess it was a third of the funding was for Comet. When are we expected to hear more about Comet? And as far as details on what have been their operating costs, how have they utilized the money from the 2012 project, and what would we be looking at going forward with them for operational costs?
Councilwoman Terratio, you recognize?
Thank you. Yes, people started looking at me. So
There's a reason why.
okay, so in terms of information from the Comet, that can be pretty readily available. We have a finance committee. We have, they don't go through the comprehensive list of all of the years of funding, but we can probably pretty easily get our hands on what the funding has looked like year over year, and kind of big picture financials. So I think that's, I'll put in a request for that for Comet staff.
Councilwoman,
Let's follow up there.
yes.
Can we have somebody from Comet come, or someone who is a transportation professional who could speak objectively about bus system in a city like Columbia come speak at one of our future work sessions?
That is noted. Councilwoman Terratio, I guess to mention, I know you serve on the board for the Comet right now, and so I know you mentioned providing information. Is there any other discussion that you all are having related to future funding?
So yes, and I can say very generally that the Comet is aware that it is not fully in charge of its funding mechanism, right? So the board and staff of the Comet don't get to choose whether we have a transportation penny or a third of the transportation penny. We rely on the voters. I will say that looking into the future, they have been pretty conservative, because in case there came to be a year or some period of time when those funds were not coming in, so they could make adjustments. I forgot the other question.
I think that was it. I just want to know,
Okay.
it was a yes or no if you guys had talked about it or not.
Yes. Oh,
But-
and the other, I'm sorry. And then the other piece of my train of thought was that within the Board of the Comet, we are starting to meet together, particularly an ad hoc committee will start to meet regarding transportation penny, future needs, and make sure that there's a good line of communication between not just me and Mr. Walker, who also serves on the board, but other members and county staff. And yes, thank you.
Thank you. Checking to see, do we have any questions online? I cannot see.
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am, you're recognized.
I was just reminded that the TPAC information does send out information about the comet. So that is an email that we get. So if I know we get a lot of attachments, but if you want to search back your emails and look for that attachment, you can probably scan through that too.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir, you're recognized.
I do know that we've had some good financial information for comment as to any given point in time. So this is just more so an overall assessment of the last 10 years or whatever, and then a forward look. That's my request. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone need a recess or a break before we move on to the next topic? Okay, we're going to take a brief 10-minute recess and we'll be back. Okay, everybody. What do you say when you come out of recess?
I have a lot of things that I can say and ask what's next. Oh, so if I just.
Okay. Hit the gavel? All right, we're back.
Almost done.
All right, Mr. Jones.
Madam
Ready.
Chair, other members of council, in the remaining several hours we have in this work session,
I can firmly say, as Chair of County Council, there will not be several hours left of this meeting.
okay, in the
Thank
remaining
you.
in the remaining minutes, if you can, we're going to go to slide number 16. It's page 16 in your book. And really, this is, I think, the task ahead of us. We've got this needs list that is extensive, that the county has already contracted with good folks to put together, but we've got to take that list and we've got to boil it down to an actionable set of projects. And so we think the needs become projects because the council begins to think of.
Interrupt you for a second, Madam Chair. Be recognized. I
Yes,
had
sir.
a question.
You-
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question that came to mind during the recess. So looking at transportation needs, it's on page 4. And I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Mr. Jones, or if this is a question, for Mr. Beatty.
Okay.
But at the very end of the enumerated transportation needs, it has unfinished projects, and then it's further demarcated, funded and unfunded. And so my question is, the estimated number, Mr. Beatty, that you reached, the 2.1 billion, right? Does that take into account the transportation needs to include funded and unfunded projects from the current penny, that as you use that rubric here, unfinished projects? Is that also included in the 2.1 billion, that estimate?
No, sir.
Okay.
So this estimate today, and I always qualify, every estimate is only good on the day that you prepare it because things change. It is 2.2 billion today, and we only included 2 remaining Richland Penny projects that, as I recall and understand, were de-scoped, and that being Pineview Road from Shop to Bluff, and then a portion of Broad River Road. So more detailed questions about what the existing penny is completing, I would have to defer to Director Maloney.
And the reason I asked the question is because it's my understanding that under the current penny, even with unfinished projects, the ones that are funded, there's enough funding to finish all the projects that are deemed funded, even if they're not complete at this stage. But that we do have a category or a group of projects that are deemed unfunded, which we don't have funds committed to those projects. And under the current penny, we could only fund those unfunded projects in the event we finished all the funded projects and then there was money left over. Is my understanding fruitful, Director Maloney? And so I was just wondering, with that estimate of 2.2 billion rather, if that included, I guess you would say, the unfinished but unfunded projects from this current penny, but you're saying that number does not include the unfunded projects from the current penny.
That is correct, yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right, thank you. Answers my question.
Any
Thank
other
you, Madam
question?
Chair.
You're welcome. All right, Mr. Jones?
So returning to slide 16, this sort of represents what we think the distillation process that we're in the middle of now is, and that is taking the needs that have been identified through the RFP responses and all the work that Mr. Beatty described, making a decision on funding consistent with what we've discussed today. And once you've determined we have needs and we have projected funding, we then need to figure out, well, then how do we turn all that into actionable projects? And so the middle part of this slide talks about taking needs, applying principles, and yielding projects. And those principles are things that we're going to spend a fair amount of time working on over these next several months. And finally, taking the projects and categorizing them in a way that is actionable from a ballot standpoint. And so if you'll go to the next slide, this is really the exact same picture, but it shows that we need to be intentional about seeking and gathering input and advice on these questions. And so there are two bodies that have been identified by the county council as entities from which it is seeking input and advice on various portions of this distillation. So the Transportation Advisory Committee, or TPAC, has been identified as an entity that has already been formed by council, that is already meeting regularly, that would be in a position to provide some input and advice, in particular on the projects, the principles, the categories, and possibly even the degree to which funds should be spent on transportation projects versus CMRTA projects. Likewise, the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee has also been identified not only by council all the way back in October of 2023, but it has had a pivotal role in the management of the current penny as an entity that can be a screen that can provide input, advice, and ultimately a recommendation to council on how to take the needs and convert them to projects and principles, on how to then categorize those projects so that they're actionable through a referendum question, and finally, to finalize a recommendation on the split of the penny between transportation projects and project categories. The charge, if you will, of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee in many ways has already been made because council took action on its resolution back in October of 23. The charge, if you will, to the Transportation Advisory Committee has yet to be done. Council has charged the TPAC with the work that it's undertaking now, and council, if it desires, can charge the TPAC with taking further steps with respect to this penny. So if you would turn the page to the page 18 and flip the slide, this is a draft of a resolution that council has also seen at a prior meeting, and it's a resolution that would be suggested as an item that County Council could entertain at its March 19th meeting. The purpose of this resolution is to seek the assistance of the TPAC. Specifically, the resolution says that the county is requesting that TPAC will provide input and advice on the needs list, on the projects, on the principles to be applied, and ultimately the categories that will appear on the referendum ballot. Likewise, the county is asking TPAC to weigh in on the split of funds between transportation and between the CMRTA. There's a specific deadline provided in this resolution of June 17th, 2024, this draft. And by that date, council would ask that a report be made from TPAC to Transportation Ad Hoc to allow Transportation Ad Hoc to then take it all in and ultimately make a report to County Council or make recommendations to County Council. It is envisioned that there would be communication ongoing between TPAC and Transportation Ad Hoc. The purpose of the resolution is to give specific guidance on what's needed within a specific time frame. And I will stop there, Madam Chair, and see if there are questions or discussion about the TPAC charging resolution.
Anybody online? I did have, I guess, a question or clarification, and I'm not sure, Mr. Jones, this is for you or for staff. But when looking at the current makeup of our TPAC now, representation from municipalities, we have all municipalities in the county have a seat currently on TPAC. Is that a
we believe that's an accurate statement.
Any other questions or comments from our colleagues related to this draft resolution in front of us related to expanding the functions of TPAC? Ms. Barron, you're recognized.
Yes, Madam Chair. I guess this does a follow-up to the question that you just asked. We know that there are representation on TPAC, or should be there. Do we also, or can we get a report as to the vacancies that may be on that board presently?
So I am, Madam Clerk, sorry, I heard you say we do not have vacancies right now. I think that is for the county positions.
Correct.
But as it relates to municipalities, I am hearing that there may be some vacancies.
Madam Chair.
Attorney Wright, you recognize?
I don't remember the specific municipalities that are vacant, but there are a couple of vacancies that they currently have. So Richland counties are full, but there are a couple of municipalities that do have vacancies.
And Attorney Wright, who serves as staff to TPAC?
For Richland County,
Correct.
I don't think we technically have a staff assigned to them, but we do have the PIO or communications that deals with them and transportation as well. So I don't think there's official staff that's assigned to them, but those two departments do deal with them.
And how would municipalities be notified of their vacancy?
Well, that's what we can do, or what I guess staff, or whether it's the clerk's office or our communications or transportation can. If this passes, they will be sent this document. The chair will be sent this document to notify the participants that the positions need to be filled, and if they aren't fulfilled, then Richland County will fill them.
Ms. Barron, I apologize. I think I took over your question. Go right ahead.
No, you're absolutely fine because you're in the same vein of where I was going. And so I would just like to offer up, because it doesn't appear that we have direct communication with the municipalities in ensuring that their vacancies remain full. So if indeed this is the body that we are going to continue to use moving forward, I would like to encourage staff to come up with a formal way of keeping in direct communication with the municipalities about their vacancies, because, you know, if we're going to use them, we need to make sure that everybody's present and accounted for. And if they're not, then of course, I don't know if we as a county can fill their positions with county individuals. But, you know, this would alleviate people having something to say, well, we didn't have any input. But if they're not bringing people to the table, then they're not represented. So I just, again, want to reiterate the point of we probably need some formal process to be able to communicate with municipalities if indeed we plan to continue to use this body as we've done in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. Mr. Jones, you recognize?
Just a bit of sort of late-breaking information. So the chairman of the TPAC, John Black, actually provided a list late this afternoon, and he indicates that there's one vacancy for Arcadia Lakes and there's one vacancy for the city of Columbia. There appear to be potentially 2 additional Richland County appointments. We can drill into that more, but I know we've focused this conversation on municipalities, so it looks like there's 2 slots.
Thank you. But Blythewood, Irmo, everybody else is, okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Attorney Wright, you recognize?
And regarding the vacant positions, since we are kind of working on a truncated timeline, they can be notified, the ones that have vacancies, the municipalities can be notified that, hey, you have this vacancy. If it's not filled by whatever date, that Richland County will fill the position, and Richland County can choose someone from, say, the city of Columbia or from Arcadia Lakes, for example. So but it will be filled by Richland County Council if they don't fill it themselves.
Attorney Wright, I see a little bit of what you just said reflected in this on the screen.
Yes.
Is there a way to add a timeline to what you're saying, right? Like, is there after a 15-day, like what is the notification window? I guess that would make sense to add in here.
Yes, one can be a definite date or period can be added, since we are operating on a truncated timeline. I guess we can talk about what specific date that would be, but yeah, that can be added so that everyone will know, say, okay, if you don't have one by this date, then someone will be chosen for you.
I mean, just to share my own personal opinion with my colleagues, I think that should be in there regardless. I feel like if we have open seats and municipalities aren't appointing, that we, the county, should make sure that we have those appointments. So I feel like that should be there regardless of if we expand their duties or not. I do think a timeline should be there so we can make sure the boards and commissions we have are appropriately filled. Other thoughts, comments? All right, Mr. Jones?
So maybe just flipping now to the last page. This is sort of a pictorial representation of the roadmap that council has already reviewed. For those of you interested in color coding, everything that's orange is the county council. Everything that's green is a meeting, a scheduled or proposed meeting of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee. Everything that's yellow is either a scheduled or a proposed meeting of the TPAC. If you're wondering which is scheduled and which is proposed, if it's purple writing within the square, then it's a proposed meeting. And so for those of you keeping track at home, these are 19 different potential public meetings that would occur, some of which are already scheduled for purposes of doing the things that we've been talking about, accomplishing the task, moving from needs to projects to categories. And so what lay before us, or at least first step, Madam Chair, is the March 19th meeting of the County Council, at which it is proposed that the TPAC resolution with the revisions that have been discussed here be taken up. And then there'll be a regular meeting of the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee on March 26th, at which, pending the chair's making of the agenda, we would then have further conversations about projects and principles. And then, depending upon how the TPAC is constituted, we would suggest it meet as soon as it can, hopefully on April 1st, and so on and so forth. Again, this is nothing new. This is something council has seen before. These dates are proposed to the extent that they are special meetings and otherwise reflect meetings that are already scheduled.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I appreciate you outlining this schedule. Not a fan of the orange and purple combo, but thank you.
Colors are helpful.
You know, for attempting to color coordinate. I appreciate
I
that.
just had to pick something that would show on all colors. I'm not a fan
I don't know
either.
if it shows well, but it shows. But no, seriously though, this is a good kind of timeline of next steps moving forward, so folks can look at and understand where we are. Lots of more discussions and opportunities for engagement. This was just our work session today to receive information and walk through this, so no action is being taken today by the body, but happy to address any other last-minute comments or questions for Mr. Beatty or Mr. Jones.
Madam Chair, this is not for.
You recognize Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not for Mr. Beatty or Mr. Jones, but more so for Director Maloney. At some point, Director Maloney, in the very, very, very near future, I would ask that you provide a list of the unfunded projects from the current penny with the price tag next to them. Obviously, council hasn't made a decision yet as to whether we're going to select a penny as the funding mechanism for our transportation needs going forward. The jury's still out on that. But we do know, based on the assessment that has come back, that the price tag for current needs is $2.2 billion, and it doesn't take into account those unfunded projects. And I know that one of the principles that has been suggested or bandied about, is projects that have not been completed. And for me, that would mean those unfunded projects in the current penny. So I think if we can just, or at least for me, having that information would be helpful just going forward, especially again if that is going to be one of the principles or sort of tenets that we use in prioritizing projects in the event we decide to go with a new penny or continue the current penny.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you. Very brief questions. The first question is or when will this document that you just shared be placed online so that citizens can view it?
The PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, the one that they just showed on the.
Okay, well, just so you know, everything that is here that he just color coded
that's in there. Okay.
is already in our packet. It's just in a visual graphic, but this same stuff is in our packet already.
Perfect. And then I guess I would imagine that your average person, playing at home could have some questions about, where we are in this process and what comes next, color-coded roadmap notwithstanding. And so, does there exist some sort of FAQ? Could there be some sort of FAQ just addressing just kind of some of those basic questions that people might have?
I think we can work with the communications office and develop something if you would like.
I think that it would be helpful just because I think it's reasonable for somebody to look and say, well, where are they in this process? What did they do? And what does it mean to help them process this information that they've received today? And I know that this body is very committed, and I feel very comfortable speaking for everybody here, that this body is very committed to an extraordinary level of transparency, just as we, talk about these things and consider these things. And I think just some real simple FAQ would go a long way in that regard.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. Anybody online? Thank you all for coming today. We are at item number 3 on the transportation work session agenda, which is adjournment.
So moved.
The motion for adjourn. Second. Madam Clerk?
Brenham,
Yes.
Pugh,
Yes.
Livingston,
Livingston. Adjourn.
Teratio,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Walker, Mackey,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.